thank you, Stephen and Riley, for laying out the foundational ideas or fundamental ideas behind coming up with this special issue on tribal ecology. So, since you all have already elaborated in detail about the uh, what ideas are behind this sort of like initiative, I would go straight into my paper. But before I started, because we are talking about tribal ecology, but it's the title of my paper is Tribal Economy, and that might seem quite off the tangent. But as Riley pointed out, that how land and is in sort of like intricately enmeshed in tribal identity, and it's sort of like it poses a existential question for their survival, because they are dependent upon land for their subsistence farming. As Matthew pointed out, like the heterogeneity or different ways the relation could be shaped across different tribal identities is something that we should also be mindful of. And also the question of caste and other sort of like intersectional identities that might, you know, uh, sort of like go against this essentialized notion of tribal ecology or their relationship with the nature. So while I'll be talking about tribal economy, it sort of like closely also relates to their subsistence uh, strategies, and that are diversified across different sectors that include subsistence farming as well as mining, that is part of the industrial capital complex, and some other traditional sources, for instance, forest. So to begin with, before I begin my presentation, I would like to put up a slide. I'm going to share my screen. So to begin with, I would like to give some context to my field side. I conducted my dissertation fieldwork in Jharkhand, uh, in the West Singhbhum district, uh, in a village called Nakahasa. So Jharkhand is a relatively new state founded in the year 2000 after a long-drawn movement for a separate statehood based on a distinct ethnic identity. This state is a part of the region in central India inhabited predominantly by tribal communities uh, that has also undergone a continuous process of despoilation, exploitation, and internal colonization for minerals and forest produce, first by the British and then by the post-colonial state. Nakahasa is a remote village located nearby Saranda Forest Reserve. It is about 8 miles away from the district headquarters, Chaibasa. The main source of livelihood in the village is subsistence farming, horticulture, and daily wage labor. The village is predominantly inhabited by Ho tribe, with a minority population of Hindu backward caste groups, particularly Gopes and Khandaites, who have been traditional cattle herders. Nakahasa presents a microcosm of the larger Jharkhandi movement. In Nakahasa, a movement against limestone mining, led by the villagers, went on for 5 years and eventually succeeded in installing the mining operation. However, the limestone mining had already operated for around 3 decades without any resistance from the villagers, as it served as an alternate source of wage employment for them as well as from the neighboring villages. The life histories I'm presenting here belong to some of the elderly residents who are in their 70s and have varying memories of working in the mine when they were young. Before discussing the life history of the respondents, I would like to unpack the term tribal economy that I have used in the title to mark its relevance and connection with the larger context of my study. During a recent visit to the state of Karnataka, the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, while addressing a public meeting, made the following statement, and I quote, "Dalits and tribals were the largest section who had never ever seen the door of a bank. It's the Jan Dhan program that made it possible to connect the crores of these deprived people with the banks." The phrasing, having not seen the door of a bank, when spoken in Hindi, the language in which it was actually spoken by the PM, carries an added weight and emphasis over the primitiveness and backwardness of tribals and Dalits in terms of their access and participation in formal banking services. Now, let me take you almost 100 years back to the year 1913 in Chaibasa, and I quote some paragraphs from the land settlement report for the year 1913 to 1918, prepared by a British officer stationed at Chaibasa, AD Taki, for the Kolhan region, the region where my field site is located. And I'm showing the excerpts here to illustrate the colonial framing of the Ho tribe and its uncanny resemblance to what PM Modi has referred to in his speech. So Taki writes in his report that the Ho, as a rule, is too lazy and improvident to lay money by. He uses up a large proportion of his rice in making his national drink, rice beer, which he calls teeing or illy. As long as he has enough to eat and drink, he will not exert himself to improve his condition. Whether he has enough or not, he remains cheerful. Further on, he talks about something in a very frustrated tone over Ho's incompetence. And he says the only difficulties in the work where the Khuntkati proceedings, the land settlements of the village, the DECO inquiries, comparison, and reconciliation with the last settlement records. The language and the stupidity and incompetence of the Aboriginal staff had to be employed. The Ho, as a rule, speak no language but their own, and officers and staff who knew Ho had to be recruited and at a station which limited the field of choice. So as we can see here, in the case of Chaibasa and Ho tribe, the British colonial administrators have deployed themes of money and primitivity to create a temporality of tribal non-modernity, where tribals were always outside the money form and thus lacked an understanding of an economy based upon commodity exchange, which have been further reproduced and sustained within the post-colonial Indian society and the state. Some scholars have pointed out that while ethnographic and policy accounts are full of references to the economic exploitation of tribals, they preclude any critical analysis of the discourse of money, commodity, and the role they play in the indigenous society and economy. In response to such portrayal, and to come up with a critique to such approach, I'm going to present a couple of excerpts from life history of the elderly respondents from my field site, Nagasa, that not only shows a different conception of commodity that is sophisticated, yet flexible, but also shows the intimate role played by money in their everyday economic transactions. As I asked Rani Bari, a Ho tribal woman who is in her early 70s, whether she worked in the old mine, she responded in her usual cheerful voice. I have worked in the mine and I also have done wage labor to run my household, take care of agriculture and raise my kids. I never found Rani sitting idly in her courtyard. She was always busy with one or another work, whether it was carrying cow dung to a pit for making manure, sweeping her courtyard, carrying firewood, or making ropes from grass as seen doing in the picture. It had been just a month for Rani Bari working in the old mine when she got married to Motai Bari, who was from Nakahasa only. But in a couple of years, her husband deserted her when she was pregnant with their youngest child. She took over the responsibility of raising her two kids and taking care of the paddy fields. That was the phase of her life when she did all sorts of work, ranging from working in the mine, brick kilns, or doing daily wage work in agriculture and construction in the village. Recalling her days of hardships, she said, I used to take care of the agricultural work on my own. My brother lent me some money and I started selling rice beer in Hart, that is local bazaar, and saved some money from the earnings. With the help of my savings and earnings, I repaired the boundaries of the agricultural paddy fields and hired laborers for weeding the crops. The paddy harvest was so good back in the day. Next time I interviewed Rani Bari, she was with Mukta Gop, her longtime friend. Both of them had worked together in the mine and paddy fields in the village. Recalling their memories of working in the mine together, Rani stated in a lively tone, after they would blast the boulders, we used to pick the rocks of this size, indicating with our fingers, and carry them on our heads to fill the boxes. The more you can work, the more you will earn. We used to get there early in the morning. I and Mukta used to work together and took turns on picking and carrying the stones. We used to think that if we missed a day of work, we would worry that we would be getting lesser money that week. We used to think of earning some wages mostly. If we work more, we will earn more. In those days, we had strength and endurance in our bodies, but now that is all gone. Before the mining came to the village, people relied primarily for their livelihood on agriculture, uh, and apart from that, on waste work and livestock. When the mining started in the village, the wage for agricultural as well as non-agricultural work was fixed at 4 rupees for women and 6 rupees for men, based upon the gender division of agricultural tasks in the community. These rates are decided and revised periodically in a village council meeting. Just like agriculture, the work at the mine was also gendered, as men were employed for carrying them, as men were employed for breaking bigger stones with hammer and chisel in the quarry, and women were employed for carrying them on their heads over ground from the pit. However, the wage people were getting at the mining site was much higher than the agricultural wage, almost being 4 times higher, around 25 rupees. And both men and women were being equally paid despite the gender division of the labor. I asked Rani Bari and later many other female respondents as well, did not they feel bad for being paid lesser for same amount of work in the paddy fields compared to what they received from the work in the mining? Also in the mine, they received equal wage money, while in agricultural work, they were paid lesser than men. Did people switch from agricultural to mine work as they were being paid way much higher wage money? Did subsistence farming suffer due to arrival of the mining that offered more wage money for the same hours of service as a daily wage laborer? So before we engage with these questions, let me briefly revisit the conventional conceptualization of the term commodity and the inherent limitations that forecloses the use of commodity as an analytical tool. The way Marx defines use value, the shift to commodity production should be seen teleologically as an evolutionary, unidirectional, and historical process. And commodity, thus understood, is endowed with an objective use value that is supposed to be universally applicable across geographical and cultural boundaries. Arjun Appadurai, in the introduction to the edited volume, The Social Life of Things, Commodities in Cultural Perspective, revisits this Marxian concept of commodity, which has been mostly perceived as a pre-given, cultural neutral, and non-analytical category, especially in the context of pre-modern or non-capitalist societies. Appadurai cites George Simmel to bring forth a completely different reading of commodity, one inflected by cultural specificity. Simmel argues that value of an object or commodity is contingent upon specific social, historical, and political context, and thus commoditization lies at the complex intersection of temporal, cultural, and social factors. And I use such conceptualization of commodity to analyze the way labor as commodities is structured, exchanged, and valued differently among whole tribal community. Now, returning back to the question I posed earlier, before I come up with a response, let me briefly explain how the labor and remuneration and agricultural work is organized in the village. So all kinds of work, whether agricultural or non-agricultural, are sourced by two kinds of labor in the village. One based upon daily wage work, where people from within the village or neighboring villages are hired. The other type of labor that is available to the villagers is called denga the penga, a traditional practice of offering free labor within the community whenever it is required. No waste, but only rice beer, and at times midday meals are offered to people offering free labor, and the household or family receiving the free labor are obligated to return it by offering their free labor to the contributing party. So based on the respondents' reply to my earlier questions, the arrival of the mine did not impact at all neither the agricultural work nor occasional non-agricultural village tasks. However, it did complement their existing source of monetary income. There were some obvious explanations for the absence of any immediate impact of mining upon the village subsistence economy. One was the surplus labor available in the village. The second was seasonal requirement of labor for paddy cultivation, a period during which the mine operated on its minimum capacity, and sometimes many of the residents shuffled between mine work and agriculture as per the immediate requirement of the crops in their field. None of their narratives from my respondents suggested any discomfort or sense of grievance that may arise from the wage gap between the mining and agricultural work. Moreover, none of the respondents affirmed that villagers started abandoning agricultural or non-agricultural village work in favor of relatively better paid mining work. Rather, all three kinds of labors coexisted in the village and worked smoothly. Also, it was not the case that villagers did not desire money or did not need money. It can be easily gleaned from Rani Bai's narratives how crucial money was not just for running her household and raising her kids, but also for taking care of agricultural input cost. So if we follow Marxism or neoclassical lens to understand commodity, in this case, labor as commodity or the coexistence of three kinds of valuation of labor, that is mining work, denga de penga, and daily wage work based in the village, looks absurd. Following Marx, a commodity in this case, which is labor, should carry a universal use value. However, what we find here is that coexistence of three kinds of use value. One use value of labor that is embedded in the capitalist mode of production, that is the mining side. Second use value that is being decided based upon the economic efficiency of the subsistence agriculture within the community. And third use value being culturally determined, yet embedded with the economic activities having material implications for the community in the longer run. So here we might run into problem if we determine commoditization based on an absolute use value, resulting from certain measure of demand, supply, or scarcity. The only way to do so here while adopting this approach will be to embrace the colonial ideology of tribal economy, according to which hoes are not able to grasp the workings of money as a means of exchange or labor as a commodity having absolute and universal use value, which should be valued and thus remunerated equally, irrespective of the sector or economic sphere you are working in. In order to have an alternate interpretation of this particular situation, I would like to bring in what Apadarai suggests about the process of commoditization, which lies at the complex intersection of temporal, cultural, and social factors. When I asked Neeti Bari, one of my respondents, that once the mining was closed, did not she fear a major part of her income would be lost, and that could be troubling for meeting household expenses? She replied, no, we had rice at home, which we grow in our fields. We rely on that. My following question was regarding the lower wages for women in the village. She paused for a moment and responded, they may be raised if they wish, cement the village council, but it will also significantly increase the expenses of doing paddy cultivation. Maybe if we start charging higher agricultural wages, it would not be we would not be able to pay for all the work. How will people get their paddy seeds sown in the field? How you also have to get the fields weeded regularly before harvesting and carrying it to the khalihan. Khalihan is a ground cleared and leveled for winnowing the paddy crop. Uh, During my stay for the field work, what I observe is that women do most of the agricultural work, particularly paddy cultivation, ranging from sowing, weeding, harvesting, winnowing, and separating the chaff from rice. Men are mostly involved in plowing, a task that has been strictly kept for men, as touching a plow for women is considered a taboo among hoes. Women like Rani Bari, Mukta Gop, and Niti Bari, who are either widow, deserted by their husbands, or single women, and there is a considerable number of such women in the village who take on the responsibility to take care of their family and the household, but most importantly, the agricultural work, which is crucial for ensuring food security and also maintaining social and kinship bond within the community. This is because almost all the social, religious, or healing rituals require rice and rice beer to be performed. These women understand that keeping their agricultural wages low by the village council is unfair. However, they cannot assess the labor invested in paddy cultivation on same par with the labor invested in mining work. Farmer is permanent, relatively stable, and ensures
Climate
food
change
security
fluctuations and outcomes
for the family
on
as well as the whole
Pakistan
community.
prospect resolution.
Whereas, I'm sorry, I lost it. Farmer, that means paddy cultivation is permanent, relatively stable, and ensures food security for the families as well as the whole community. Whereas the latter, that is mining, is short lived, inconsistent, and unreliable. As it can be inferred from Niti Bari's response that they are aware of sacrifices they are making in differentially valuing their labor for agricultural work, but at the same time, they are also aware of the long-term return it provides in terms of assuring livelihood, subsistence, food security, and sense of community, a phenomenon that became quite obvious to an outsider like me during the COVID-19 pandemic that resulted into economic shutdown and sudden loss of livelihood. In conclusion, if deferral, anticipation, and speculation is the hallmark of modern economic activities, especially in finance, in the hope of a future return in the era of a highly unstable, volatile neoliberal market economy, and is considered as a pinnacle of modern economic savviness, the government ensuring future food security and community stability in the long run, while sacrificing economic value of their labor and offering subsidized wage work, reflects a more sophisticated yet flexible understanding of use value and commodity, and the crucial role they play in sustaining an economic system that is not monolithic, but constitutive of multiple economic systems, which is being at the same time consistently and increasingly intruded and dominated by the global capital and neoliberal market economy. Here I conclude. Thank you.
Thank you. That's